I play fictitious characters, often solving fictitious problems. I believe that mankind has looked at climate change in that same way.
Climate change threatens hard-won peace, prosperity, opportunity for billions of peoples.
You were just listening to some of the celebrity power and supporters attending the UN Climate Change Summit, while Mr. Dreamy himself was chatting it up at the UN. Straight Talk host Jerry Agar and Tom Harris from the International Science Coalition debunked climate change myths. So check this out.
You make a pretty bold statement. You accuse these people of perpetrating a moral travesty.
Well, that's right. In fact, when I was at the climate conference in 2009 in Copenhagen, I was speaking with one of the top Ethiopian delegates, and I asked him, I said, what do you think of the conference? And he pointed to the TV screen where all the protesters were, and he pointed to the floor where all the negotiators were. He said, these people are crazy. They're focused on stopping or trying to stop what might happen in the year 2080. My people need help today. So I said, well, don't you think that humans are causing dangerous climate change? He said, I don't know, but we need help now. You know, so this is the real issue. I mean, we have $1 billion a day being spent on climate finance across the world. 94% of that is being dedicated to what might happen, let's say, in the year 2080. The UN didn't want that. They wanted a 50-50 split. And in fact, only, as they say, 6% is going to adaptation. And that's a really big problem because people do need help adapting to natural climate change. You know, in the Saharan Africa, where deserts expanded. Only 2 years ago, the UN said they needed billions of dollars to help feed children who were suffering due to the drought. But they couldn't get the money because they're focused on trying to stop what might happen in future generations. So, I mean, that's completely immoral.
Yeah, there was a statement from someone just recently in a developing country who was saying, you know, I might die from malaria, so what happens on the planet maybe 5 years from now is not my biggest concern. Yeah, we should be able to do both of these things at once.
Well, yes, if in fact it was true that we could control future climate. I mean, if we knew with certainty that there was going to be a catastrophe in the year 2080, you could make a logical argument that we spend most of that $1 billion a day on, you know, trying to stop that catastrophe. But, you know, or books like this, for example, the Non-Governmental International Panel on Climate Change, this report came out in October of last year. They have thousands of peer-reviewed scientific references showing that probably the sun is the major driver of climate change over the last century. They're saying 66% or more. They also show that extreme weather events are not increasing. We're near a low. We haven't had a major hurricane strike against the United States, you know, category 3 or above, for 8.5 years, okay? You have to go back to 1900 to find out when that last happened, you know, such a big hurricane drought. Same thing with tornadoes. So a lot of the science on which this whole conference and all these protests, a lot of the science is extremely uncertain and probably wrong.
Drew Hudson is the executive director of Boston-based Environmental Action. He said, we have all the tools and technologies we need to stop climate change.
Yeah, well, it's hilarious, eh? I mean, you think about it, what controls the Earth's climate? I mean, things like the sun, things like clouds, things like ocean currents, things like variations in the sun, as I said before, things like even our position in the galaxy, okay? That influences climate. Carbon dioxide is one of the many greenhouse gases, most of which comes from nature, that they're saying has now taken over and has become the major driver of climate change, and our small contribution is now going to overwhelm all those other changes, or those things driving change, and suddenly we have become the master controller of the climate. I mean, this is like something, well, it's worse than Star Trek. I don't think Star Trek ever talked about controlling climate on a whole planet, you know, so I mean, this is completely ludicrous.
I wonder what Mark Twain would think, because one of his famous sayings was, everybody complains about the weather, but nobody does anything about it.
Yeah, that's right. But you know, we should focus on climate change, no question about it. We actually should increase the research funding so that we can actually understand what's going to happen. The Russians say we're headed for cooling, and that would be a disaster for Canada. A couple of degrees drop of temperature on the prairies, and we'll lose our wheat crop, okay? If it gets a bit warmer, well, so what? We adapt farming practices used in Arkansas, but there's nobody farming north of us. So the federal government's focus in Canada on adapting to warming, well, it's good they're focused on adaptation. It's incorrect. I mean, they're focused on the wrong thing. They should focus on the most dangerous possibility, and that, of course, is cooling.
Al Gore has been wrong in his facts before, but let's just assume that he's right when he says that 90 million tons per day of carbon dioxide emissions are being pumped out through man-made sources. That sounds like a lot.
Well, it does until you look at how much nature puts out. I mean, the oceans, depending on the temperature and the activity of phytoplankton, put out 12 times as much as humanity. I mean, trees and rotting and things like that puts out 10 times as much. Respiration puts out 10 times as much. So, in fact, the amount that nature puts out, it's really amazing. Tim Boyle, from previously of the University of Winnipeg, he says that the uncertainty in the measure of how much nature puts out is greater than the complete human contribution. Okay, it's kind of like saying June set a record in temperature of 1/50th of a degree, but the uncertainty is 1/5 of a degree. I mean, it's completely ridiculous. We don't really know that humans have any effect at all on global climate.
All right, now where's the money? Is the money in saying we've got bigger problems than global warming, or can you actually bring in a lot more research grants and money if you say, oh my God, we're going to cut?
Well, that's it. The funding is multiplied by 100 over, the 1970s. If it's a major policy issue and it's in the press all the time, the government's more likely to, to give them money. So I think money is a major driver. People act as if science is objective, okay? That we're finding truth, the knowledge about nature. But that's not true at all. Philosophers since ancient times have recognized that what they call natural philosophy and what we call now science is very subjective. It's very, very much dependent on the researcher's worldview, on the kind of observations they make. Knowledge is supposed to be universal, necessary, certain. Well, what we're finding now with science, especially in something like climate change, is it's very contingent. It's very much uncertain, okay? It's very improbable, and that's where governments have to bring in scientists from different points of view and hear, how uncertain is this? How much should we dedicate to what might happen in the distant future in comparison with people suffering now? Because we know with 100% certainty that they need help now. So that's what the government should do, is open hearings to hear what's really happening.